Have you ever wondered what secrets are sealed inside the coffin of England's greatest queen? Queen Elizabeth I, the woman who defied kings, crushed the Spanish Armada, and led her nation into a golden age of power and glory. She was Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, a figure larger than life itself. Her name inspired loyalty, fear, and awe. But behind the crown and the legends lay a haunting truth. For all her victories, Elizabeth carried one fear she could never escape: the fate of her body after death. Beneath the stones of Westminster Abbey, her coffin holds not just the remains of a queen, but a disturbing secret that time itself could not keep hidden. Elizabeth was not just a queen, she was the spirit of an age. Rising to power after years of turmoil, she turned a fragile kingdom into one of the most feared nations in Europe. For 44 years, she ruled with unmatched intelligence and iron will. She crushed rebellions, silenced rivals, and stood unshaken against the might of Spain. When the Spanish Armada, the greatest naval power of its time, sailed to invade her realm, Elizabeth's courage turned the tide. She became more than a monarch. She became a legend. Her reign was called the Golden Age, filled with discovery, art, and empire. Yet behind the painted face and royal gowns lived a woman who carried deep fears. She knew how fragile power could be, how quickly a crown could slip. She had signed death warrants, betrayed blood ties, and faced assassins. And through it all, one fear haunted her above every other: the terror of what awaited her body after death. For all her power, Elizabeth could never escape the shadow of death. From childhood, she had seen it claim those closest to her. Her mother executed, her cousins betrayed, her rivals struck down. She knew too well that even queens could fall, not by swords alone, but by time itself. Among her private fears, one stood above all: the fate of her body after her final breath. In the 16th century, death was not gentle. Embalming was a brutal and invasive act. The body was not honored but dismantled. Flesh cut open, organs torn out, the chest stuffed with herbs and spices to mask the inevitable rot. To Elizabeth, this was not preservation, it was desecration. She begged her physicians never to let her body be opened, never to let knives strip away what she believed should remain whole for God. But death does not honor fear, and royalty cannot command. The grave. When the Virgin Queen's final hour came, her worst nightmare awaited her. On the 24th of March, 1603, Queen Elizabeth I drew her final breath. The Virgin Queen, who had once stood taller than kings, was now just a body, helpless, silent, and surrendered to custom. Her pleas to remain untouched were forgotten the moment her crown lost its weight. Physicians and surgeons moved quickly. Her body was carried to the cold, stone chamber of embalming. There, beneath flickering light, the process began. Long blades split her flesh, and skilled hands reached inside to remove what had once given. Her life, the heart that carried a kingdom's hope, the stomach that endured years of fear, the liver, lungs, and intestines. One by one they were lifted out. In their place, pungent herbs and costly spices were packed tightly: cloves, myrrh, and cinnamon. Not for honor, not for ritual, but for survival. Without this grim surgery, her corpse would swell with gases, burst its coffin, and turn a funeral into horror. Elizabeth had feared it, yet it was done. Majesty was reduced to necessity, and even Gloriana's body became a machine against decay. When the embalming was complete, Elizabeth's remains were wrapped in crimson velvet, embroidered with Tudor roses, the final symbols of a dynasty at its end. Her body was then placed inside a heavy, lead-lined coffin. It was not built only for majesty, but also for containment, a fortress to trap the slow, terrible work of decay. The funeral that followed was one of solemn beauty. A royal barge carried her coffin down the Thames. The skies were grey, the waters dark, and thousands lined the banks in silence as England mourned its queen. From the outside, the ceremony was flawless, majestic. a farewell worthy of Gloriana herself. Yet, whispers followed the procession. Those who came too near spoke of a strange, clinging scent, a sickly sweetness that seemed to escape even the sealed coffin. Beneath velvet and lead, Elizabeth's body was already reminding the world of its frailty. Her coffin was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, a queen interred among kings. But the silence of her tomb hid more than it revealed. For centuries after her burial, the world above moved on. Tourists, worshippers, and kings came and went through the halls of Westminster Abbey. They saw her grand tomb, majestic, polished, a symbol of eternal peace. To them, Elizabeth rested, in glory, untouched, undisturbed. But beneath the stone floors, another story was unfolding. Time was at work inside her coffin. The lead shell bent under pressure, the velvet decayed, the silence grew heavy. No one could see the slow transformation taking place in the darkness below. What appeared to be peace was only an illusion. Elizabeth's body was not preserved. In majesty, it was locked in a struggle against the inevitable hunger of decay. Centuries later, in the 1800s, the silence was broken. During the reign of Queen Victoria, a man named Dean Arthur Stanley was granted rare permission to explore the sealed royal tombs beneath Westminster Abbey. With lantern in hand, he descended into the cold, damp vaults where England's monarchs slept. The air was thick with centuries of dust and rot. As Stanley entered the chamber of Elizabeth I, he expected dignity, perhaps even the quiet majesty of a queen at rest. Instead, he found ruin. Elizabeth's coffin had collapsed. Its wooden layers crumbled into powder. The crimson velvet was faded and brittle, the rich embroidery stained by time. Even the lead, thought to last forever, had warped and buckled under the pressure within. And then came the most unsettling discovery. Resting directly above Elizabeth's coffin lay the remains of her half-sister, Mary the Sighs, the rival who had once sent England into flames of religious war. Enemies in life, forced together in death, their decayed coffins shared the same narrow vault. In the flickering light, Stanley realized a grim truth. Even queens could not escape the relentless grip of time. What Stanley saw confirmed Elizabeth's darkest fear. The embalming that was meant to preserve her dignity had failed. The queen's coffin bulged unnaturally, the velvet cover stained and fragile, the lead shell twisted by the gases of decay. Time had turned her final resting place into a prison of rot. Elizabeth, the monarch who had once commanded fleets and defied kings, was reduced to a fragile, bloated coffin, barely holding together. The sweet spices that had once masked the stench could no longer hide the truth. Even in death, her body seemed restless, struggling against the cage meant to contain it. Above ground, her tomb stood as a symbol of majesty and peace. But below, the reality was grotesque. The disturbing truth was clear. No crown, no empire, no glory could stop the slow, merciless work of decay. The Virgin Queen had won many battles. In life, but against time, she lost. And in that vault, her ruin whispered the same fate awaiting us all. Yet even as her coffin decayed, Elizabeth's legacy refused to die. Her reign shaped an empire, inspired an age of art and exploration, and etched her name into history. Above her tomb, visitors still admire the marble, the music, the elegance of Westminster Abbey, never imagining the broken remains below. Her story reminds us of a simple truth. Time is the final ruler. Velvet fades, lead bends, flesh decays, but memory endures. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who stood against kings and storms, now rests in fragments. But her legend lives on, not in her coffin of lead and velvet, but in the story of an age she defined. Even queens cannot escape the grave, but some spirits outlive it.